Let's find out more about age discrimination in the workplace and what you can do to protect yourself.
Since he was 18 years old, Ken Marshall has worked for the same employer. Over the years, he rose through the ranks to become general manager. He had job security and loved his work. But one meeting with his boss made him question his future with the company.
My boss looked at me at one point, making a statement, just a general statement to me, which frightened me to no end. Have you ever considered about retiring? And I'm going like, whoa, I'm just too young to retire. I can't retire. And so she just kind of left it at that, but it really put a scare.
The words uttered by Marshall's employer foreshadowed many changes. In a short period of time, the company downsized, then relocated to suburbs 40 miles away. Ken was forced to take a pay cut.
Right now, we've dwindled down because of the government requirements. We've dwindled on down to 10 or 15 in the last 2 years. A lot of some of our draftsmen left, or other key people we really didn't need. I lost 2 secretaries. I had 3 secretaries. That's how busy we were.
Although Marshall still has his job, he's haunted by the fear that he may be forced to find another employer or face early retirement. He's concerned about hunting for a new job as an older worker and worries that he may be discriminated against because of his age. Marshall has sought the advice of Marvin Adams, a career counselor and adjunct faculty member at Columbia Union College in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Adams, author of the book Fast Track to Your Next Job, works with clients of all ages and backgrounds. He says he's witnessed numerous accounts of probable age discrimination. Many of his clients are senior citizens who are having tremendous difficulty getting back into the workforce.
Age discrimination is probably one of those hidden discriminations, because no one's going to come out and says, well, you're too old for the job. They're going to say, well, you're overqualified. Or they look at you and be very nice to you, and they say they will let you know, and then they never let you know, or they just said, we gave the job to somebody else that's qualified for the position.
Adams says one of the big obstacles for working seniors is that the workplace is constantly evolving, and many operations have changed dramatically since older workers entered the workforce. Many seniors lack the skills to operate newer technologies, such as computers and computer software.
I deal with the fact that there's people who their specialized skill set is something that's either dying out, or that there's such a narrow market for it that the competition is too high, or it's out of the area and they don't want to move.
I didn't have the hands-on experience to do it myself. And that right now is really frustrating to me, because it's like a lot of things, I can tell them, email this and type this and do whatever, but I tell them to do it. I don't do it.
Adams has been working with Marshall on sprucing up his resume and is teaching him interview techniques. More importantly, Adams has instilled confidence in Marshall, pointing out that his current skills and abilities may be applicable to a different career.
Ken actually has a bright outlook, and I'll tell you why. Because Ken has the people skills. Ken is a great people person, and he's been a manager that's where he excelled in. He excels in the other technical things too. Those won't be transferable, but the people skills are transferable.
Still, the harsh reality for people in Marshall's situation is that many will have to take lower-paying jobs in order to stay in the workforce until retirement.
The average senior today is probably taking a position that's about 10 to 15% less than what they were making before they were laid off or downsized or outplaced or whatever. And that is quite traumatic for many seniors, simply because they're used to a lifestyle, and when you have money, you spend it.
Marshall has already been on a few interviews. For the most part, he has found employers unresponsive.
When I send a resume out, I always have this big question in my mind. What are they looking at on that resume? And even though my age is not on there are certain dates that are on there, and as far as schooling and stuff like that.
It's hard for Marshall to know if age discrimination is at work, and even if it is, there's very little he can do about it.
But it's extremely difficult to prove, and then you have to ask yourself, do you want to go through the trauma for the next 2 or 3 years minimum at a great cost to yourself just to prove a point? And then would you want to work there after you did prove the point?
In the meantime, Marshall remains at his old job. Wherever he works, continuing his career is important to him, but also to stay active.
There's a lot of people that are working to 67, 68, 70 years, 72 years old. They have a lot of energy. The longevity for men and women have greatly expanded over the last 50 years. And a lot of them have energy. There are a lot that actually are retiring, and then approximately 2/3 of them go back to work.
I can't retire. There's a lot of things I need yet because I have a young family, a young wife. So I will continue as long as I can to work.
Joining us in the studio is Peter Pettish, a managing partner in the law firm of Ford & Harrison, LLC. Peter represents a variety of businesses in labor and employment matters. He is admitted to practice in Maryland, the District of Columbia, in federal appellate courts, and in the U.S. Supreme Court. Thank you for joining us today at the Daily Apple.
Thank you.
Do you think it's unfair for employers to target older workers when layoffs happen?
Well, it's not only unfair, but it's illegal under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act.
And that is?
That's a federal law that was passed a number of years ago to protect quote-unquote older workers, people in the protected category of 40 and up. And then states also have protections for employees based on age as well. And sometimes they define a protected group of 40 and up and sometimes not.
So you work for the employer side. Do you think age bias is a real or imagined phenomena?
Well, I think it's both. I think there are certainly some cases where an individual is in denial and they're terminated from their job for performance reasons or just no longer being a fit with new management, and they'll automatically say, aha, it's because I'm older, even if the new management is in the same age category or perhaps even older. They'll look for a scapegoat. But I think that age discrimination also exists in the workplace, and that's why we have these laws.
And age discrimination in the workplace, do you feel that seniors, when they get a certain age, should actually expect to be discriminated against, or how do they fight back against that?
Well, I would hope not. And there are a lot of different factors going on right now as the demographics of the workplace are changing. We have a much, much higher proportion of quote-unquote older workers in the workplace. Many workplaces are taking great pains to try to retain persons who are older for their experience, for their skill level, especially knowing that there's an even lower proportion of the quote-unquote younger workers in the workplace.
And just to clarify that, because everyone thinks that it's all younger workers in the workplace, our dependency ratio, the number of younger workers to older workers, is actually declining, correct?
That it is, substantially.
And so in the future, it seems that there may be much more validity for older workers to be in the workplace in their 60s, 70s, and 80s year olds.
Absolutely. And to be called back to the workplace from retirement.
If they feel like they're being targeted against, how does an older worker protect themselves?
Well, I think the way to protect yourself as any employee in any protected category is to start documenting what they perceive to be going on, what they perceive to be the unfair treatment that they're receiving in comparison to others in the workplace. Because remember, it's a comparative thing. An employer may be equally unfair to everybody, and that's not illegal. It's when you're unfair or biased and making material decisions on the basis of a person's age, just as with race and gender.
When you talk about protecting themselves, when I talk about protecting themselves, and you say write down things or document, what are some of the things that that a mature adult should look out for so that they know, oh, that's age discrimination, I need to document this?
Well, I mean, there may be certain things said in the workplace that may have an age bias to them, talking about being long in the tooth, something like that. That might be an
What does that
example
mean?
of some slip. But it's also well, I think it's actually a reference to cats who once they get older. I don't know if you've had an older cat, but the teeth actually keep growing and growing and growing on them. And I think that's where that comes from. But the occasional slip, the occasional slip up like that is not necessarily going to be enough to enable somebody to prove age discrimination. Because remember, the employer and the decision makers actually have to act on that bias and take an action based on that. And there may be factors other than age that motivate a decision.
So you've worked for a long time in the employer side of age discrimination. Give me a couple of examples of some of the things that you've seen in your cases.
Well, I've certainly seen cases where there are perceived slights, where people perceive that they're being looked at differently, where people perceive that it must be because of my age, because I thought my performance was good. And yet, in a lot of cases that I've handled, the documentation from the employer side has been there to show performance deficiencies, efforts to sit down with the person, work with them to try to get their performance up to expectations, and then it hasn't met expectations. And yet there are also cases that people will tell me about where an individual will come in, and this is more in the hiring context.
Actually, hold that thought for 1 second. We're going to be right back.
Okay.
When we return, we'll continue our conversation with Peter Pettish regarding the legal aspects of seniors in employment. We'll be right back.
True or false? The Age Discrimination in Employment Act, ADEA, protects people who are over 60 from age discrimination. Answer: false. The law allows people who are age 40 and up to file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
We're back on the Daily Apple. With me in the studio is Peter Pettish, an attorney who specializes in labor and employment matter. Peter, before we went to the break, you were telling us a story. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I was talking about the hiring context, where people have come in, they've gone through the application process somewhat anonymously, in other words, without showing their face. Age isn't something that's necessarily reflected on a resume. Extensive experience might be. Person's called in, and I've heard the story over and over again about the deflated look in hiring someone. And this is more anecdotally. I don't have any statistics on that kind of thing. And certainly the person perceives that it's all over, that they don't want to hire somebody in that age group, or that they were disappointed at how old the person was. Nothing's ever said, though.
It's so interesting that you say that. Do you think it's across the board that people think, okay, I'm too old, and if it's not I'm too old, I'm a woman and they wanted a male, or I'm black and they wanted someone white, or is it really across the board with all different types of groups? And
well, you can certainly have that perception and just the gut feeling that, oh, they think I'm too old, or oh, they wanted a man rather than a woman. That's not going to be enough, of course, to prove age discrimination. But if you dig deeper, you may look at who was hired for the position and how did their experience stack up to yours. And you can start perhaps building a case by digging deeper into the facts. But of course, at that point, you pretty much have to throw the gauntlet and start the litigation or the complaint process.
that's what goes on when you're interviewing and when you're at the beginning of a job. Now let's talk about being laid off or being fired from your job. I understand there's something called the take it or leave it or today only severance package that includes a legal waiver that you can't come back and fight for age discrimination. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, that's being challenged more and more, the take it or leave it. And under the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, which was enacted after the Age Discrimination Act, in order to have a valid release under the Age Discrimination Act, among other things, the individual has to be given at least 21 days to consider it, 45 days with a RIF of many people, and then they have another 7 days to revoke acceptance of a release. So it's not being crammed down a person's throat. And very recently, there have been some cases challenging the validity of releases where the language hasn't been a faux pas of lawyers. Understandable.
Legalese in
yeah,
layman's
legalese.
term.
Understandable. And courts have taken a look at, well, does the individual have the right to challenge the validity of the release? Or would a reasonable person think that they have lost the right to even challenge the validity of a release? And courts have overturned releases on that basis as well.
Let's say that I'm in the middle of my job and I'm starting to feel a little bit of pressure. Maybe that younger people are being hired more often, or my skill set isn't where it should be, or something of that nature. How do I then take action and protect myself against age discrimination?
Well, I think you need to have honest conversations with whoever your supervisor or manager is on your job performance. And like anybody else, be asking the questions, what can I do to improve? Is there any kind of training that I might be able to benefit from? And also see what kind of training is being provided for other people in similar situations to yours. And that goes across the board for any employee, regardless of age.
So let's say I'm an older employee, but I really don't want to learn all the newfangled computer things that younger adults are so interested in, the technology, let's say, for instance. You're usually on the side of the employer. What are they looking for in an older employee?
Well, I think they're looking for the same thing in an older employee that they're looking at, ideally, in a younger employee. That's willingness to learn. In an older employee, you have the benefit of more experience. You have the benefit of perhaps loyalty, better judgment, more mature judgment. And again, I'm stereotyping, but I'm stereotyping in perhaps a good or favorable way. But employers need to get away from stereotypes and assume that maybe an older worker is too set in their ways or unwilling to learn new things.
Great point.
And that's just a faulty assumption.
I've heard a lot of times that when a person is laid off, unfortunately, the next time they go to try to get a job, they have to take a job pay cut, or they should not have high expectations. What is your familiarity with that experience?
Well, in the workplace, in looking for new jobs, one big impediment is expectations on pay, because another employer might be trying to fill a position at a certain salary level. And if the salary expectations are too high, the salary expectations that you may express in a job interview are too high, and they can hire somebody else who's also qualified for that job, but who has a much lower salary expectation. They may take that person, and that's not age discrimination.
That's
just pure economics.
And you also have to keep up your skill set so that you're competitive.
Absolutely.
When you talk to those employers that you're working with at this time, what do they say that they're going to do in terms of the future and the shortage of younger workers, and how are they going to try to involve older workers in becoming more a part of an organization?
Well, I think a lot of employers who are really paying attention to the demographics are going to make a greater effort to provide training programs and other means to retain the people that they have, the talent that they have. Some employers are trying to attract the talent that is out there. Now, those are the success stories. They also need to start looking at benefits programs and even retirement benefits programs as people may decide to remain in the workforce, but priorities change over time. And there are some people, as they near what used to be the conventional retirement age, may or may not want to scale back and do other things. And employers need to figure out, by taking a look at their benefit plans and other plans, a way to keep this experience and this knowledge base within their organization before the person goes away.
And to follow up on that, I think it's also important that employers have elder care in the workplace, because when you're thinking about retaining mature employees, you have to look at caregiving issues and things of that nature.
Sure, of their parents and family members, absolutely.
How do you think that a mature adult can actually benefit an organization besides just their wisdom? What are some of the unique capabilities that a person can bring that's an older adult?
Well, experience, judgment, loyalty. I think, again, as with anybody else, a willingness to learn, institutional knowledge, what's been successful in the organization, what hasn't, or what's been successful at other organizations that they've worked with.
Do you feel like in the near future this situation of age discrimination will get better or worse?
Hopefully it's going to get a lot better for both employers and employees because, let's face it, we're all aging. The decision makers are going to be older. The workforce is going to be statistically older. And we're going to have to make room just by economic necessity for older workers in the workplace.
Well, thanks. This has been great information. It's been a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.